You're watching the Eyewitness News special, Remembering Katrina.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this day of remembrance, reflection, and recovery. I'm Eric Paulson.
And I'm Sally Ann Roberts. 1 year ago this morning, we were fearfully watching the worst hurricane in U.S. history approach the Gulf. It was a storm that would forever change our lives.
We all know where we were a year ago. What we did not know is what was in store for us. No matter how much or how little damage you suffered, we were all affected by Hurricane Katrina. Over the next 18 hours, we'll look back at the events of that fateful day and remember the lives lost and the survivors who will rebuild this great city.
Their images, like those that are suspended around us, are burned in our minds forever.
As we put this in motion, I mean, look at where they have it headed, a little further to the west of with that model I just showed you, that projection I just showed you, by 7 o'clock tomorrow night, and then going in early Monday morning. I mean, they have it coming into Plaquemines Parish and going up toward the mouth of the Pearl River.
Katrina was on one of the worst possible tracks for us, one that has always been predicted would be a catastrophic destruction to the city and to the entire metropolitan area.
That Saturday afternoon, public officials began to urge residents to prepare to evacuate.
No one really knows exactly where it's coming, but I think it's very wise for all of us to be well prepared and for each individual in each family to know exactly where they're going to go.
We've seen the cars pick up in the last 60 minutes or so. A lot more cars moving out of town here. You know, this is I-10 actually eastbound. Cars usually go eastbound, but because of contraflow, they're going westbound now on I-10 here at Loyola. Now, we saw Jill Hazy a little earlier showing the shot of I-10 and Causeway, some congestion there. There's going to be some congestion in some areas, but pretty much at this area, it's pretty easy sailing so far for this area. Now, early today, it was not that case. Just after 4 o'clock, these pictures were taken from a helicopter, and you can see that it's pretty backed up there on I-10 going out just in this area that we are right now. Pretty backed up on I-10 at that point, but really about an hour after contraflow went into effect, just after 5 o'clock, things started to get a little smoother and cars started getting out of town a little quicker. So we really only had about I'd say about an hour and a half or 2 hours at the most of some heavy traffic on I-10, and after that it's been certainly probably surprising for some motorists, and certainly an improvement from Hurricane Ivan a year ago.
And as many of you know, the contraflow was one of the few success stories of the evacuation. Hundreds of thousands of people left the city in less than 24 hours.
But despite a warning from weather experts, the city delayed calling for a mandatory evacuation of residents. Mayor Ray Nagin talked about it with Mike Hoss and Karen Swinson late that Saturday night.
I got a call from the governor basically saying I needed to talk to this guy who's the head guy at the Hurricane Center in Miami. She gave me his number. I called him. He said, Mr. Mayor, I've been in this business 33 years. This is the real deal. If you can issue a mandatory evacuation, I would recommend you do. He said the storm surge on this particular hurricane could reach 20 to 25 feet. He said you do not have a levee system that can handle that. He said this storm is growing in intensity. It's already at 145 miles per hour with wind gusts of 170 miles an hour. He said this is the storm that everybody has feared for New Orleans for many, many years.
You are the mayor. You've just heard that. What do you do?
Well, you know, I'm looking at all our legal options. If I could do it tonight, I mean, I've got my city attorney is looking at all of our options as far as a mandatory evacuation is concerned. And the two sticking points are the hotels and the hospitals, because she does not believe that we can really pull this off. So we're looking at an option whether we can exempt them. But come first day, first break of light in the morning, you may have the first mandatory evacuation in the city of New Orleans' history.
And we're continuing our coverage of Katrina 1 year ago today. As on the day before Katrina hit, people would continue their preparations and evacuating the area.
The power and track of the storm, now approaching a Category 5, was strong enough to order residents of the North Shore up above Interstate 12. Mike Ross reported on those who heeded the warning.
Plywood boards and hammers and nails, and heavy sandbags. The must-have survival supplies tonight on Eden Isles Drive. The water is already starting to rise here, and so is the concern.
The concerns I have is the water, the flooding, and the tornadoes after the hurricane. It bothers me the most, the tornadoes.
Hoagie Schuster has lived in Eden Isles for years, and he's boarded up his home for many storms. But he has a very bad feeling about Katrina.
I've lived here for over 20 years, and this is really the first time I've been very, very concerned about what the outcome is going to be.
This was the clock that was given to my mother and dad for their wedding in 1930, and it was in
Carol Hobson is evacuating and taking a family heirloom with her. She usually stays for hurricanes, but not this time.
He and I were both talking about that. There's some reason we feel differently about this one. You know, I usually won't go. I like to stay. This one does seem to worry me, and I don't know why. It's maybe just a feeling in the air, looking at things and wondering, you know, will they be here when we come back?
Some people in Eden Isles tonight are enjoying a few last moments of normalcy, knowing that Katrina could change everything.
And those would be the last moments of normalcy for a long time. Everyone was watching Katrina that day, hoping there might be a last-minute jog that would spare the metro area from the worst. They hoped it would make one of those last-minute turns right before the hurricane hit, just like George did back in 1998.
But Katrina was holding to her course, and Chief Meteorologist Carl Arredondo began to look at how bad it could be.
Again, you can see this very well-defined eye getting closer and closer to southeast Louisiana. So we haven't seen something like this in quite some time. As you've heard us say many times before, the last major hurricane to affect metropolitan New Orleans, Betsy, in 1965. So the 40-year anniversary of Betsy, we're dealing with a Category 5 hurricane just on our doorstep.
Many residents who had nowhere else to go and had to face Katrina headed for the Superdome as the place of last resort.
The dome was first used as a shelter during Hurricane George, and now it was being used once again as a safe place for residents. Jonathan Betts reported on the thousands who sought shelter inside the Superdome.
Still lines at the Superdome, people trying to get inside, although they tell me now the lines have pretty much gone down to zero right now. But within the last hour, still several hundred people lined up trying to get inside the Superdome. We were told by some people waiting in line they'd been sitting there for over 4 hours trying to get inside. There is security procedures for people to make sure that no one goes in with contraband or any kind of weapon. So they are screening people as they went through. And it was kind of interesting because we heard the National Guard soldiers, the troopsmen, walk up and down the aisle calling for women and children. They were bringing the women and children inside the Superdome first. They told me they did that because they wanted to get them out of the elements. It is kind of drizzly in there. They want to get them inside as soon as possible. Estimates show that there's about 15,000 people inside the Superdome right now. Now, earlier today, they had warned there was not enough supplies for evacuees, from what I understand, but the National Guard came in and brought in food and water for the people at the Superdome. What do you think about this?
It's horrible.
Why do you say that?
Because all these families in need, and here we out here waiting all this time, getting soaking wet. That's bad.
Why did you decide to come out here?
Because we had no other way. I was in a car accident. My car is ruined, so this is the only best way I can get into a shelter.
And good morning, everyone. Around this time on August 29th last year, wind-driven waters from the hurricane had already pushed to the edge of the 40 Arpin Canal in St. Bernard Parish.
And water was continuing to push into Gentilly through leaks in the Industrial Canal floodwall. At this time last year, Hurricane Katrina was coming ashore in Plaquemines Parish.
A fisherman there, Kent Freelich, rode out the storm in his 75-foot shrimp boat in Empire under the Empire Bridge. He shot some very dramatic video of Katrina and details what he experienced on that day.
This is at daylight, right as the eye is approaching and winds are starting to calm down. This is two guys that were staying on a smaller boat next to us in the canal, and their boat overturned and they made their way up to the top of my ice machine. It was unbelievable. We thought they were gone. We knew they were staying on their boat, and we kind of watched it go underwater, and we were hoping that they got off of it, and they did. They made their way up to the top of the ice machine there, and that's where they rode the storm. We didn't realize they were alive until daylight. And here, I stepped out of the back of the cabin as the eye was passing over, the winds was calming down, and we're videoing these guys making their way back from the ice machine to my boat, take refuge for the second half of the storm.
It was shortly before 7 o'clock a year ago today that water had been pushed into the intercoastal waterway, intercoastal canal. The Mr. Go funnel, the water began to top the levees in eastern New Orleans. It brought the first major floodwaters to this city. And again, at this time last year, we were not even aware a lot of this was going on. It may be the most dramatic photograph of Katrina's devastating storm surge that was taken, at least to our attention.
The photo was taken by a man who worked for Entergy and was stationed above the water where the Mr. Go meets the industrial intracoastal waterway. And Dave McNamara talked with Don McCloskey.
Storm surge from Hurricane Katrina as it breaks over a levee in eastern New Orleans. The anonymous photo is posted on the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation's website. We wanted to know the story behind the photo, where it was taken, and who snapped the picture.
It was the first time we saw the magnitude of it and how that actual levee was getting eroded over there.
Don McCloskey is the manager of Entergy's Michoud Power Plant next to the I-510 bridge over the Intracoastal Canal. This is where he rode out the hurricane and snapped picture after picture of Katrina's powerful storm surge.
It just was surreal to be able to see something like that. There were waves up on top of that that were probably 15 to 18 foot on top of what you saw from the hurricane protection levee that was out there.
In this home video, you hear Katrina's winds screaming through the power plant. McCloskey and his crew watch as the levee reaches the limits of its protection. The water pours in, dumping 5 to 8 feet of water inside the power plant.
As we all know, one of the hard-hit areas in this region was the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and as the storm approached, many first responders were on the roads trying to help whoever they could on the coast of Mississippi.
And as Ben Lemoyne reported a year ago, there were extremely tense moments and a last-minute rescue before Katrina's full fury hit the Gulf Coast.
Would you advise EOC, and they'll advise the response they want?
For Fire Chief Pat Sullivan, there is no hunkering down or riding out the storm. It's more riding in the storm to check on his city. And with the eye of Katrina just minutes away, he doesn't like what he sees.
What you're looking at is Camille 2.
On Highway 90, a few hundred yards from the Gulf, waves crashed several feet over the asphalt. Sailboats that were chained down in harbors were tossed inland like toys. For emergency crews, it's a reconnaissance mission in the worst of conditions.
We had a 53, but it's off and on. Let's get out of here. Okay.
But a call on the radio would soon turn it into a rescue mission.
Tornado just hit an apartment in North Gulfport, may have somebody trapped.
With that word, a convoy of crews raced to the other side of the city.
Hopefully it's minor. Hopefully it's not as severe as it sounds.
But in some ways it was worse. 2 families trapped in a duplex with the roof ripped off and Katrina about to be on them.
3 more, 2 adults and about a 13-year-old girl.
One by one, firefighters carried out parents and children.
Are you okay, ma'am? What happened?
We was in the house, all of a sudden we heard something sound like a bomb dropped on us. The roof, we went there, the roof was gone. It was gone.
Let's go.
Rescue workers took the families to a shelter. It was the first of many calls for help in the hurricane. But with the limbs and power lines crisscrossing roads and the Gulf surging more than a half-mile inland, help would soon be cut off, leaving many on their own.
This is why we tell people to get out.
By this time in our timeline of events happening a year ago today, water from the Industrial Canal leaks had reached into mid-city, but something a whole lot worse was about to happen.
The east side of the Industrial Canal levee that protected the lower Ninth Ward began to fail. Floodwaters surged into the lower Ninth Ward, destroying houses and rushing across the parish line into Araby and Chalmette. The first indication we had that one of the levees had breached was just about 8 a.m. Monday morning during the height of Katrina.
We were broadcasting, as we mentioned before, from LSU studios in Baton Rouge when Bill Capo caught the bulletin from the National Weather Service.
Let me ask you,
if I may break in here for a second.
Okay,
we've got a flash flood warning for New Orleans, so if you guys can get to me. This has just come out from the National Weather Service. A flash flood warning for Orleans Parish. Stay right there, Chancellor. We'll come right back to you. This is a flash flood warning for Orleans Parish.
A flash flood warning for Orleans Parish.
What has happened is a levee breach has occurred along the Industrial Canal at Tennessee Street. Now, Tennessee Street's in the Holy Cross area. It parallels the Industrial Canal a couple of miles away, a couple of blocks away from the Industrial Canal. Because of this levee breach, 3 to 8 feet of water is expected in that area.
About a year ago at this time, the huge force of the water that had piled up behind the 40 Arpent levee in St. Bernard Parish began to overtop and then breached the levees there, causing a huge storm surge and then flooded St. Bernard Parish.
Around 8:30 in St. Bernard Monday morning, many in the parish thought the worst had passed them by.
Down in Miro, the Vaccarella family was had their home video recorder going. As you can see by the timestamp on the home video you're about to see, it goes from bad to worse in just a matter of hours.
Yeah, that came up with Bernie's house right there. And there goes some more Rocky's roof. Look, that's what we got. That's what we got. The Charles, our vehicles, our houses, our whole livelihood. Everything's flooding out right here. Bye. Look at this freaking house. It's underwater. Trying to get his boat from the save himself. And then they're jumping in out there and going to get him. I think their boat's hooked on a stamp. Terrible. Look, look the houses. Every house over is underwater. That's not how I wanted you to do a few months ago. That's it, guys. I just wanted you to do my son. I didn't know how to live with you.
We were here all night, Sally Ann, and you know, when we left this set, the hope was that it wouldn't be as bad as they had feared. They say it wasn't as bad as we feared, but it was bad.
We're looking at the Hyatt Regency right now, and we haven't. You can see the wind blowing through those windows that have been blown out.
And you know, we had thought this was going to be.
Look at that.
Yeah, we thought this was going to be a devastating storm like this. And you know, for a while, when it said it was jogging a bit east, and we said the eye wall wasn't going to come into Orleans Parish, or at least down to the CBD, we thought maybe we'd escape some of this. But you can see. It was 9 a.m. The wind had already been howling for hours. Some areas of downtown saw street flooding from the torrential rains brought on by Hurricane Katrina.
But the water in the streets here was nothing like what was to come. Water was already racing through gaping holes in the levees all around the city, the Industrial Canal, the Orleans Canal, and the London Avenue Canal. And they soon would be joined by the failure of the 17th Street Canal levee. As many as 100,000 homes would be flooded and hundreds of lives
lost. You know, 80% of the city flooded from those many breaches. And at this time a year ago, we really didn't know how devastating of a flood it was. Only when time started passing did we realize, my gosh, everything had been wiped out.
As we take a look back at what was taking place a year ago, Katrina was not quite through with New Orleans, even though water was quickly filling the city from all directions.
The London Avenue Canal, already collapsed on its east side, would now fail on the west and send more water pouring into the Gentilly area. As the water swirled through the Gentilly and Lakeview area, residents who had stayed wondered where the water was coming from. John Bonk was photographing the catastrophe and soon figured out what was happening. He tells his story.
8:30. We're here at 501 Florida Boulevard. We got the most ferocious hurricane in the history of this part of the country, anyhow. Blowing, and I suspect it's well over 100. It's supposed to go to 150, 165. And my front door is open because it's coming out the north, and I'm facing south. The wind's out of due north, blowing the side fence down, front side. They blew the fence in the back down, but I think my boat, it blew my boat off of its shock. But I think my boat is holding up well, considering that it's a dead side to the ferocious wind. It seems like to me that it's my own fence in the back and the fence from the highway, which is still standing, or what's keeping it from blowing sideways, even though I tied it to the trailer. It's got the whole weight of the trailer under it. I'm on the north side. I can't dare open the door. I'll just take a few pictures through it. I think the highway fence is holding up, and that's very good. That's helping my boat. My fence is holding up. The wind's out the north, pretty much due north. You get a little, some sense of the ferocity of this thing when you watch those big trees on the side of the house. And they've really been blowing like crazy. Yeah. This is an awesome sight. Very frightening. Well, the worst part of the storm is over. And the wind has swung. It started out in the north, and now it's in the west-southwest. It swung around. And my thoughts are that there's got to be a break in the levee somewhere, because the water's still coming up. It's not rainwater. It's something. It's coming up, but it's not rainwater. So I don't know where in the hell all the water's coming from. Well, we suspected it much earlier, that there was a break in the levee. We got 4 to 5 feet of water down here. Everything's floating. Everything's lost downstairs.
While searching for evidence of when the 17th Street Canal levee breached, officials found some New Orleans firefighters who may have had that information.
It was video the public had to wait 10 months to see because a congressional investigation kept us from showing it.
2 months ago, Mike Hoss caught up with 3 New Orleans firefighters who first witnessed and videotaped the breach at the 17th Street Canal.
At daybreak, Katrina was roaring, and visibility was next to nothing. The 9 New Orleans firefighters riding her out inside the Lake Marina Tower couldn't see much, but heard plenty.
The wind coming through back here was, I mean, it was like a freight train coming through there, howling noise it was making.
Just after 9 o'clock in the morning, Captain Paul Helmers, an 18-year veteran, saw something he wasn't expecting. Water rising in the back parking lot.
I would say about 10 minutes after we saw it rising, I was pretty certain that the levee had to be breached. It was rising at such a rate.
Helmers grabbed his video camera and went up to this top floor stairwell. With the building swaying, he searched and searched but couldn't see the breach until visibility cleared enough for him to zoom in a half a mile away to the water pouring in.
When I saw that, I'm sure my coworkers had the same reaction. You know, my heart just dropped. Even though I knew the levees were breached before that, seeing it, and and just knowing that the fate of the city was sealed.
Whitecaps in my backyard here.
Jackley says he stayed at his lakeshore home for every hurricane since 1972.
I never had any big water before, and then when it started coming up like that, I said, "Oh my goodness, what am I going to do now?"
The wind intensifies as Katrina's western eye wall moves closer to Slidell. First, pine trees smashed the boathouse.
I figured they'd come down pretty quick.
What Jackley didn't expect was the water in Lake Pontchartrain to rise into his yard and then begin creeping its way toward his second-floor refuge.
The wind blowing the water in. I don't know what to tell you. I got another 3 or 4 feet, man. I'm going to have to head for the roof. When my car started floating away downstairs, and the shop downstairs started going, and the glass doors downstairs broke away, and all the yard was full of water. And I says, well, it can't get much higher than this. And then again, I was wrong.
Then comes the real shocker. The homes of Jackley's neighbors begin tearing off their foundations.
Remember them guys that built that house over there? Here it comes. There goes the air conditioner and everything.
One after another, houses are floating by Jackley's rear porch.
Poor guy his house is moving right down the bayou.
The houses float for a while, spill their furnishings, and then sink.
Man, this thing better quit pretty quick. I can't believe that. The whole house is gone. There's Ray's refrigerator. Jesus, his whole house is gone too, man. Where's all this stuff coming from?
And the water continues rising. Jackley's second-floor living area is now under attack.
Oh, Jesus Christ, got a tidal wave coming. Here it comes up the front door, broke the front door.
The wind is pushing waves up the stairwell, blowing wind and water under the second-floor door.
Get the hell out of here, I see it. It don't look good for the home team.
The water continues its push.
Here it comes. It's in the house. Broke the door lock. There it is. Oh, man, I can't stop it now.
While waves pound the front, The houses between Jackley's rear yard and Lake Pontchartrain have disappeared.
Oh, no. There were 4 houses over there. Now they're gone, all 4 of them.
Jackley feels the waves pounding the floor beneath his feet.
When's this thing supposed to stop? Whew.
It takes 6 to 8 hours for the water to peak at this level.
Just take pictures, that's all I can do. Woo, dog. That's the second story up here.
Would you stay next time?
Oh, yeah. This old house would be all right. It ain't up for sale.
Meantime, North Shore Bureau Chief Mike Ross also found plenty of destruction all over that parish.
Katrina roared into the Mandeville-Covington area with ferocious power. Wind gusts at or near 100 miles per hour knocked down traffic lights, splintered tree branches, and ripped sheet metal from buildings. Even as the winds were still howling, residents of the Country Club Estates neighborhood near Mandeville looked over the damage.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. The wind was real high, and it was gusting like crazy. We live just down the street here, a lot of pine trees, and one real big pine tree almost set our house. In fact, it's laying, the outer limbs are laying on top of it, but it got a little hairy.
In Covington, the downed trees and power lines were also a huge problem, blocking streets and damaging buildings. A large boat sits aground in the westbound lanes of the I-10 in Slidell, an amazing sign of how far the storm surge has spread. The hurricane pushed Lake Pontchartrain deep into Slidell. The storm surge put Old Spanish Trail under waist-deep water, and some residents chose to wait out.
Couldn't afford to leave, and I didn't think it'd be this bad. When I left, my house was shifting on the cinder blocks, truck and motorcycle underwater. Lost everything.
Rhonda Scott waded to the I-10 from her home near Pontchartrain Boulevard. She was determined to carry her 2 cats to safety.
Well, I was like everybody else, May 5th storm came along, it was like this close to coming in my house. Figured I was at the highest point. But then the water started coming underneath the walls, and it started coming up really fast, and I almost didn't get out the door. I would have had to try to get in the attic. Didn't have a ladder, so I said I'll walk it out.
The extent of the storm surge simply stunned Slidell residents who were trying to return to their homes.
The damage Katrina did to St. Tammany Parish was extensive, and the storm surge was devastating.
This next story gives you a look at the horror Katrina left behind and the raw emotions the storm exposed. Ben Lemoyne traveled to the Eden Isles area and filed this report.
All of this was on this bridge. What you see here was on this bridge.
The people who call Eden Isles home were sorry to see home Tuesday evening. Sheriff's officials say every house in their neighborhood is damaged. Most are destroyed.
I couldn't believe it. I didn't think it could be this bad. And the further I walked, the worse it got. And when I got up to where Savaggio's used to be in the porthole, and saw that, I broke down. I mean, it was terrible. I don't know. I really don't know I was going to stay, but I can't stay.
All I can tell people is, hey, there's mud everywhere. And Eden Isles is, be prepared for this devastation. It looks like a war zone. I've never seen nothing like it in my lifetime. And I've lived in Louisiana since '57.
In the North Shore area of Highway 11, boats are tossed into yards, houses are on top of houses, cars on cars. What used to be a marsh is now a lake, and a several-mile stretch of highway looks like a game of pickup sticks. On the twin-span bridge between Slidell and New Orleans, many sections are hanging into the water. Others shifted several feet. Boats and debris cover the roadway, along with a car. With an ironic twist, a man named Serge rode out Katrina in his attic as the storm surge filled his first floor.
That was very bad. Basically, I was in the attic of my house for at least a good 4 or 5 hours until the water started receded, because in my house, the water was up to my hip and getting higher than that, so I went to the attic.
Others count themselves lucky. John Sconza and his son Jack surveyed their damage on the North Shore. His first floor is gone, but he's optimistic.
When your expectation again was that you were going to have nothing and you just got a standing house, my reaction to that was like, I feel fortunate. So it'll take a couple months, but once I get the water going and the electricity going, we'll clean it up and we'll be back in.
Sheriff's officials say not everyone was lucky. One man died when a tree fell on his house, and Monday night, deputies found a dead man in this car. Witnesses say he drove into the rising floodwater. Overall, Sheriff Jack Strain calls it complete devastation in St. Tammany Parish. Their worst expectations are now reality. And as they begin to look for the lost, it could get even worse.
Many young people lived in these apartments and I guess prepared to go to school in New Orleans. How many of those people stayed in those apartments on Monday? And we don't know that yet. We're preparing for the event that there may be multiple or hundreds of bodies, and we're just hopeful that that's not the case.
We are familiar with the visual images of people begging for help as the waters rose.
But up until now, we had not heard the equally tragic pleas for help from those who were calling 911. Those emergency operators answered more than double the amount of calls typical for a single day, even with thousands of New Orleanians evacuated from the city.
Now, for the first time, we are hearing people's desperate calls for assistance, and operators listened, because in most cases, that's all they could do. Jill Hazu has the story.
Please, I'm begging you, we can't stay all night. I can't breathe, my daughter can't breathe up here. Please, I heard the boats, but nobody stopped to get us. We hearing all these boats.
Ma'am, it's not that they're just not stopping to get you, ma'am. No, they're probably getting someone in the area also, ma'am.
All they could do was listen.
There's nothing I can do. It's just, you know, feeling helpless.
We just can't describe what those people went through, but we felt it. We heard it.
On August 29th, 2005, more than 3,300 people begged New Orleans 911 operators for help.
My friend from Alabama has been trying to call. Mississippi is trying to call. You know, we try to get the Coast Guard, but they can't do anything. They told me to call 911. We need to be rescued.
The water's in their house. The water is coming up. Are they trapped in a house? Yes, they are. They're trapped in. I have two different ones at two different addresses in the lower 9th ward.
They were some of the first people to hear about the devastation.
This one here turned completely around and started floating. We had to get the people out of that house with ropes up the side of the bridge. If we wouldn't have been sitting here, they would have died.
It's a disaster. The houses down here are destroyed. I never seen nothing like this before.
I couldn't believe that there were still that many people still in the city. It was just, I just couldn't fathom. You know, everybody were calling, you know, people trapped in the attics, trapped on the roof, things like that. People with babies, elderly people.
Naleska Calloway, Sandra Jackson, and Mary Knight were just a few of the operators who logged thousands of calls from concerned relatives.
Hi, I'm calling from out of state. I'm trying to relate an emergency request for someone trapped at a house in New Orleans. She's trapped in an attic. Trapped in an attic, and says your mother and who? My little sister, she's 11. They've been up there for about 18 hours now. And so I'm just assuming that they all went upstairs in the attic. My mother's 83 years old, so I don't know how well she made out.
Yes, get to the highest point where there's no, the water isn't rising as fast, so that we can send someone to assist you, okay? Try to get to the highest point in your home.
All right, well, if y'all can find a boat, help.
All right, we will try to help as we can.
All right. Do you know how much more this is supposed to come up?
I don't know how much more, sir. Please go to your attic, sir.
Soon after Katrina passed, many people started to realize the magnitude of the situation in the 9th Ward.
At the same time, Coast Guard and other rescue crews headed into the area in a desperate search to save hundreds of people trapped in their homes or roofs. Dave McNamara was there.
And here's a look at some of the things that we found in that 9th Ward, 7th Ward, 8th Ward area up into Treme earlier this afternoon.
They're sending a boat! A boat!
Words of assurance from a rescuer that help will come eventually. A man who used a water cooler as a float finds a truck to stand on. Nearby, another man has also climbed out of the water. And in the distance, a faint shout and a hand visible in a broken window are the only signs that more people are trapped in chest-deep water. From Orleans Avenue in the Treme neighborhood to the Interstate 10 high-rise almost 4 miles away, neighborhoods on both sides of the highway are swallowed by flooding from Hurricane Katrina.
We got up this morning and we just went and rained, and all of a sudden the water just started
Daniel and Glenn LaCour say there was no room for them in the car when their wives and children drove away. They climbed into their attic and kicked out a wall panel to get daylight and to shout for help.
In a matter of 20 minutes, it was up this high.
Interstate exit ramps turned into boat launches as a massive search and rescue begins in a city that's underwater.
Hundreds of people died in the days following Katrina at local hospitals and nursing homes.
Deaths at one nursing home turned into negligent homicide charges for its owners. 1 year ago, the owners of St. Rita's Nursing Home in St. Bernard Parish did not evacuate some residents. Once the storm was over and the levee was breached, the nursing home took on water. 34 people died that week at St. Rita's. Next month, a special grand jury is expected to decide on formal charges against a doctor and 2 nurses who worked at Memorial Medical Center during Hurricane Katrina. The workers are accused of euthanizing 4 patients they thought would not make it and were suffering. Right now, the Orleans Coroner's Office is still working on toxicology reports of those who died. Altogether, 34 patients died at Memorial in the days following Katrina.
As soon as we could after the storm, Eyewitness News flew in a helicopter over the damage.
Eric Paulson took the emotional ride and got a bird's-eye view of a city underwater.
And now we hear that we're going where the Interstate 10 goes under downtown on the Pontchartrain Expressway. You can see if we go to the right just a little time, there's the big pumping station that was supposed to clear all that water out, but it just has not done it. You can see some people in a boat over here. Don't know where they're going, but oh my gosh, here we are. We're crossing into Orleans Parish, and it's unbelievable how many homes are just underwater, up to the windows, some places up to the roofs, and others. If we can swing around here, oh my gosh, just it's hard to believe that we're witnessing this kind of flooding. Trees down everywhere, homes just totally flooded. This is all in Orleans Parish, and this is where it started to flood after the break in the 17th Street Canal. Actually, that might be Metairie still. Here we go over here. I'm trying to get my bearings. Yeah. All right. Now we're into Orleans Parish now. There's the 17th Street Canal right there, and you can see. Oh my gosh. Just unbelievable here. Now we're still on the interstate. This is the 610 right here. We're on the 610. Probably going by City Park. Oh yeah, City Park is just full. City Park looks like a lagoon. It's to the right over there. And just totally flooded this area. Oh my gosh. You can see trucks, all kinds of ambulances parked up on the roadway there. There's a condominium development right over there. It looks like it's an island in a sea of water. Unbelievable to see this. Interstate 610 still inundated with water. Look at the buildings underwater here. As far as the eye can see, buildings totally underwater. You can see people on the expressway here. This must be part of the rescue operation going on. It looks like they have boats and they're trying to pull people out of homes. You can see all these homes, many of these homes, up to their roofs or almost up to their roofs, just filled with water. There's a helicopter there on the interstate. They've even marked a red H. You can see all the rescue boats there. Obviously a rescue operation going on here.
That was Eric Paulson reporting, and seeing Katrina's damage from the air was one thing, but seeing it at eye level, even if that meant being in a boat, was something altogether different. Many times that's the only way our reporters and photographers could get up close views of the devastation, including that scene in Lakeview. Ton Trong brought back this footage from Lakeview a day or so after the levees broke.
And if we have the video, we'll show you what we saw today. And in essence, what you're seeing here is the area we walked over along the levee or along the canal and then got on the boat, and what you're seeing is from Veterans Boulevard, we went along there to Pontchartrain Boulevard and headed towards the 17th Street Canal, towards Bucktown, towards the Bucktown Bridge, and Sid Mar's restaurant, that is no longer there. And What we saw was, I mean, you're looking
Sidmar's
at
restaurant
now.
is no longer there.
It's not there. And
it's not underwater, it's not there?
I mean, you'll see it here. And, you know, we're just getting in. We're just trying to put this video to you. But the damage at Bucktown is extensive. And you see people right now. These are the people that were waiting. This is the product of the rescue mission that people are, you know, FEMA, everybody, every emergency worker that you can imagine is now trying to get people out from their homes who have been stuck for, in essence, hours. They've been waiting all night for people to come and get them. This is on the other side. You're looking at the breach itself. 400 feet of wall is missing. And they noticed this. The Orleans Levee District, the chief engineer, Steve Spencer, told me that this happened somewhere around 10 o'clock yesterday morning. But the word, because of the lack of communication, nobody could really get that word to anybody else. So since 2 o'clock today, they have been trying there's been a helicopter trying to drop sandbags. The National Guard has been trying to drop sandbags just to buffer or try to plug up this hole. But that's an operation being manned by one helicopter. So that helicopter has to go and refuel, and what you're getting now is just a one helicopter mission. They have to go refuel, and so they're trying to get more helicopters to somehow plug up this hole. And you're looking at Bucktown right now. The slips at Bucktown.
Wow.
This is the area where Sidmar's restaurant is. And the situation for firefighters now is they don't know who is missing, who is evacuated. And what these people are telling me, they're tying corpses to the poles. Bodies that they encounter in the water, they're tying to the poles.
Despite the fact that hundreds of thousands evacuated the metro area before Katrina, tens of thousands stayed in the city through the storm and became refugees.
They were brought by boat and helicopter to gathering points at Causeway and the Interstate, the Dome and the Convention Center, and their aggravation grew as hours became days without help.
For the people in the Superdome, still upwards of 15 to 25,000 people. What is the plan for them?
They are going to start to be moved right after we get all the medical people out. We not only have medical people here and in the arena, but we have some over at the convention center.
Say medical people, you mean patients?
Medical patients, I'm sorry. Medical patients. We're going to move them. They're our first priority. They're not that significant number, so we should get them out within the next couple of hours. Then after that, we will have 350 buses that are staged, and they're going to test to see whether they can get the buses close to the Superdome. If they do that, caravan of 10 buses with full buses will start to move people out of the Superdome, and we hope to get most of those folks out before nightfall.
Where are they headed?
They're headed all over the place.
Most have no idea where to go. All they know is they want out. Downtown is turning into a refugee camp of sorts. Hundreds left the Superdome, crowding instead the convention center. Buses are dropping off people and telling them to wait for another ride, but many are old and sick and can barely walk, and often the ride shows up very late.
Said that a bus or a van was going to pick us up from the bridge, but nobody came last night. We all slept on the bridge overnight.
So they stand and wait for hours. Information is as scarce as transportation.
How can we get out of town? Without a car. Slim chance, without a car, none.
For some, the only way out of New Orleans is by foot, because many don't want to spend a third night in a city swamped with problems.
Well, first there was the water, and then there was the hot, overcrowded conditions of the Dome, Convention Center, and I-10. Tempers were at the boiling point at all levels.
I'm looking forward to talking to the people on the ground.
I don't know whether it's the governor's problem. I don't know whether it's the president's problem. But somebody needs to get their on a plane and sit down, the two of them, and figure this out right now. Don't tell me 40,000 people are coming here. They're not here. It's too doggone late. Now get off your asses and let's do something. And let's fix the biggest crisis in the history of this country.
I continue to hear that troops are on the way, but we are still protecting the city with only 1,500 New Orleans police officers, an additional 300 law enforcement personnel, 250 National Guard troops, and other military personnel who are primarily focused on evacuation. The people of our city are holding on by a thread. Over 10,000 people were evacuated yesterday, but we estimate there are 50,000 survivors still on rooftops and in shelters needing to be evacuated from the city of New Orleans. Time has run out, the mayor says. Can we survive another night? Who can we depend on?
And I've come down here, one, to take a look at the damage firsthand. And I'm telling you, it's just worse than imaginable.
We are live on top of the Causeway Bridge over Interstate 10, where the scene behind me here is just unbelievable. It is a massive refugee camp filled with thousands and thousands of people who have come out here because of they have been rescued from New Orleans because of Hurricane Katrina. Many of them plucked off their roofs, brought in here by helicopter and by trucks, where they have sat here, many of them for 2 days, some as long as 4 days, underneath this interstate, waiting for a ride out of the city. At Causeway Interstate 10, where this rescue operation is well underway, thousands of people getting ready to camp out. For many of them, it will be their third night sleeping here in very serious situation.
It's not safe, it's not sanitary. This is just as bad as being in an area that's full of water. We need to get out of here, we need help. We aren't animals, we shouldn't have to deal with this situation either.
And FEMA's come under a lot of criticism today for the slow response to this disaster. We're going to get our afternoon update from a FEMA official who can fill in some of the details about what's been going on.
What went wrong? Is it just that the massive scope of this is so big that you...
Well, I'll make it simple for you. Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
This was a catastrophic disaster. I mean,
There were so many studies that said this was what would happen in the event of a storm like this. The newspapers wrote about it, the TV stations, all the experts, the academicians predicted it would be this bad. Why didn't and I know you can't answer, but why didn't the federal government have a plan for it?
Well, we do have a plan for it, the National Response Plan. It organizes how we get together, get organized, and make decisions to do this. The conditions we had to work in were beyond what we were able to do until we could ramp up and do better. I mean, we had to bring in the Army to do things. You know, it's just, I mean, it was an overwhelming disaster.
Thanks to the good work of the Adjutant General from Louisiana and troops that have been called in, that the convention center is secure. One of the objectives that we had today was to move in and secure that convention center and make sure the good folks there got food and water.
Well, good afternoon, Lee and Shauna. It's Friday night, it's 6 o'clock, and on Interstate 10, there's a whole new meaning to the word rush hour. The rescue operation is definitely in full swing here on Causeway Interstate 10, where thousands and thousands of people have camped out, basically, waiting for a ride out of New Orleans. The one positive thing I can say here is that this rescue operation seems to be running with military precision. We've been here all afternoon, and the number of helicopters has increased, where it is now almost a constant flow of helicopters landing on the interstate, picking up people and flying off. Authorities here tell us that just yesterday, 5 people died here at this very location, waiting for someone to come and take them up. Well, we can see very little order to it. They are able to fit, I would say, you can see just, well, since we have the picture here, just the debris that is flying out over all these people in the tents here. As this helicopter looks for a landing site, there are so many helicopters here. They are landing in pretty much any available space they can find.
Staying in a shelter with no light. My baby can't stay in there, it's too high, mosquitoes bite, that's too much.
And as we look back at the billions of dollars in damage to the city, many of us still want answers to what went wrong and how do we make it sure that it doesn't happen again.
Well, in searching for those answers, we recently sat down with President Bush at the White House to talk about those issues and what he sees for the future.
Regarding the federal response.
Yes, sir.
If you had the opportunity, what one decision would you do differently?
I would have coordinated, I would have made sure that the coordination between the state and local government was better. I think it's one of the really interesting lessons learned of Katrina, that we could have done a better job of communicating and coordinating in a much better way, and that's why we're taking the lessons learned from the past and are addressing the lessons learned and working closer with the government of Louisiana and the local government in New Orleans.
The federal government has appropriated $110 billion to the relief. Mayor Nagin says only about a fraction of $1 billion has been approved by the federal government for the infrastructure, and very little has reached the city. A year later, where's the snag here?
Yeah, you know, I've told Don Powell, who's my man who's responsible for working with the mayor and the governor, to identify places where there has been where there's bureaucracies preventing the money getting to the people. And I asked him to call Mayor Nagin recently and say specifically what is it that is not happening, because most of the money, about 70% of that which has been appropriated, has been out the door, gone to the states. And look, the purpose of all this ought not to be to blame anybody, but is to get the money to the people.
Good night, everyone.